You know, we all have passages of Scripture that come to mean a lot to us as we live our lives. And it's remarkable how that some passages that we may just read over and not really think a great deal about come to mean something special to us later on in life. Maybe after we've had a certain kind of experience, some kind of a tragedy perhaps, and we relate to a particular story in a new way that we just never did before. Well, the story that I want to share with you today that I've come to really enjoy, that means a lot to me, comes from the Old Testament book of Genesis. And I'll give you some time to turn there to Genesis chapter 32 and explain how this story came to mean something special to me. A few years ago, when we were having our vacation Bible school, assignments were being given out to the different teachers, and I always take a turn in the adult class. And I was given the story in Genesis chapter 32 of Jacob wrestling with an angel. And I wondered if somebody was trying to play a mean trick on me. How am I going to make a lesson out of Jacob wrestling with an angel? What's this story even about? It's one of those stories, you know, you read it and you think, why is this even in the Bible? What does this have to do with anything? This just seems so strange from start to finish. But it's a very important moment in the life of a very important Bible character. And I believe that every one of us can come to see ourselves also in this story. You need to know a little bit, of course, about Jacob. Jacob was not really a nice guy. Everything that we read about Jacob up to this point seems to be saying something negative about him and who he is as a person. You may remember that when Jacob and Esau are first born, there's contention there. Even before they're born, they're fighting with one another. I don't know if you've ever had a sibling that you fought constantly with, but Jacob and Esau fought with one another literally before they were ever born. And after the fact, it seems that their animosity towards each other just continues to increase as the years roll by. They're very different kinds of people. Esau is one who loves to go out and hunt. He's always out in the field. He smells like the field. And his brother's someone who stays at home, spends more time in tents. He's more of a culinary artisan, that sort of a person. They just don't live in the same worlds at all. And Jacob always seems to be getting the better of Esau, doesn't he? You may remember how that he sells him a pot of stew in exchange for Esau's birthright as the firstborn. And if that's not bad enough, when it comes right near the end of their father Isaac's life, and it's time for Esau to receive the special blessing that belongs to the firstborn, you remember what Jacob does. He deceives his father, tricks him into thinking he's Esau, and he gets the blessing instead. And then things get so bad between Jacob and Esau. Jacob is so afraid of what Esau is going to do when he finds out about this that he gets out of town. He goes to find refuge in the house of Laban, his uncle, who lives many miles to the north. And on the way, he has this unusual encounter, an encounter with God, at this place that he would come to call Bethel, the house of God. He sees something like a ladder or a staircase that's going up into heaven, and there are angels that are coming down on it and going back up. And Jacob, when he wakes up, he says, surely God was in this place and I didn't know it. And he calls this place the house of God. And he prays to God there. And he says, God, if you will really be with me the way that you have told me tonight that you will, if you will bring me back in safety to this land, well, then you will be my God. Jacob goes on his journey, and if he's had trouble before, he's just going to have more trouble now. And now it's with Laban, his father-in-law. He works for Laban, and he eventually marries his two daughters. You may remember the deception that takes place in that story, and the conflict that takes place between Jacob's two wives who are sisters to one another. There are all kinds of problems that keep popping up. And finally, after Jacob winds up getting possession of a significant portion of Laban's livestock, seemingly maybe also with a little bit of trickery there, he has to get away again, running away with his wives and his children and everything that he can take with him. Laban catches up with him on the way, though, and he says, "Why would you do this to me, Jacob? It's not bad enough that you would take my own daughters, you take my grandkids away from me, and you run away in the middle of the night. You don't tell anybody where you're going. But to top all that off, you've taken my gods." You see, Laban worshiped false gods. He worshiped these idols that somebody had made. Jacob says, "I don't know anything about your idols." And he doesn't know that Rachel has stolen them. And we're left to wonder, what would she want with these gods? Is she trying to maybe rehabilitate her father, get him to worship the true God? No, that's probably not it. It's probably more something like Rachel grew up worshiping these gods. These are kind of a good luck charm. She's going to take them with her. They're going to be a blessing to her family later on. This is what Jacob is married into. But now they're on their way back to the land of Canaan, and we remember, we haven't forgotten, and surely Jacob hasn't forgotten, there was a very important reason that he left there in the first place. He was running away from somebody who wanted to kill him. Jacob knows that an encounter is coming. He's going to have to be reunited with his brother Esau. It's been 20 years. Maybe he's forgotten all about it. But he knows that it's going to happen. And when we come up to chapter 32, he's anticipating this reunion that's going to take place. And he's sent servants ahead to go and to scout out and see what's going on up there. They come back and they say, "We saw Esau. He's on his way here to meet you. Oh, and by the way, he has 400 men with him." Doesn't sound like this is going to be a pleasant family reunion, does it? Jacob's worried about this. And Jacob is going to do something now that he hasn't done in a long time, so far as we can tell. Even with all the problems he had back in Haran with his wives and Rachel, you may remember one time couldn't have children. What is it that he does here that we haven't seen him do before? He prays. He prays to God to help him through this dreaded thing that he has to do. And what is God's answer going to be? In Genesis 32, something special happens. In verse 22, the Bible says, "Jacob arose that night, and he took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed over the ford of Jabbok." This is the territory of the boundary of Esau. He's on his way to meet his brother. He took them, he sent them over the brook and all that he had, and Jacob, get this, was left alone. Now, it may not be an uncommon thing for you to be alone. It is for me. It's very unusual. I live with a lot of people. We got 5 kids at home. You know how uncommon it is for me to have the house all to myself? It almost never happens, okay? Jacob has got a wife, he's got 11 sons, 1 daughter that we know of. He's got a lot of servants, a lot of people with him all the time. And here on this very special moment, right before this big event in his life, Jacob is all alone. And when we're all alone, we tend to think about things that we don't think about when a lot of other people are around. Come to think of it, the last time that Jacob was alone was a situation a lot like this. Jacob had been at Bethel, and he had met God. And something very similar, it seems, is going to happen here. So it says in verse 24, "Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, 'Let me go, for the day breaks.' But he said, 'I will not let you go, unless you bless me.'" Apparently Jacob's gotten an idea that this is someone who can bless him. This is more than just an ordinary man. So he says to him, this man who's wrestled with him all night, "What is your name?" And he says, "Jacob." And he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men, and you have prevailed." The word struggle there is the Hebrew word sarah, and that's exactly what Jacob has done here tonight. He's struggled. That's what that word means. You have struggled with God, with Elohim, and you have prevailed. How does that happen? But Jacob says, "Tell me your name." He said, "Why is it you ask my name?" And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of the place. Here he's naming a place again. He calls this one Peniel, which means the face of God, because he says, "I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved." This is really basically the story of Israel in a nutshell. Struggling with God. There were things that happened in Israel's history that they simply couldn't understand. But we understand in retrospect that the struggle was very important for them. The struggle was something that they needed to experience in order to draw closer to God. You find out just after this event that Jacob goes with his family. They come back to the area of Bethel where he had met with God at the beginning. He takes up all of these false gods that he finds, probably including the ones Rachel had brought back, and they bury them there and leave them behind. And Jacob, who has always in the past referred to God as the God of my father, the God of Abraham, the God or the fear of Isaac, now he refers to God as the God of Israel. You see, it's not until we go through the struggles of our faith on our own, in our own lives, in our own hearts and minds, that our faith comes to be ours. You can continue to worship God all your life as the God of your parents or your grandparents. But if He's going to be your God, you've got to go through the struggles. You've got to struggle with things in life. You've got to struggle with things in your faith. And it becomes a part of who you are. Jacob would build an altar just after this, and he would call it El Elohei Yisrael, God, the God of Israel. He's no longer just my father's God. He's mine. Back when he met with God before, he had said, "If you'll bring me back to this place in safety, you will be my God." And now he is. On that night before he went to meet his father's son, he first had to meet his father's God. We all have to do that. And when we come to those points in our lives when something difficult has to be done, those are the moments we may find when God is the very nearest. There may be difficult things you're going through right now or that you will go through in the coming months or years at some point in your life. And you can take comfort in knowing that God is with you there, even in the midst of that great struggle. I hope that when you come back to this story and you read it in the future, as it has been for me, this strange story will have new significance to you. And that you can actually see yourself a little bit in Jacob as we struggle with God, as we struggle with men, and as we come out hopefully on the other side with stronger faith in what God is doing in the world around us and what He's doing in our own lives.